When Pope Leo XIV extended a personal invitation to the world's most controversial billionaire, he expected humility. What Elon Musk did instead changed everything. But before we dive in, tell me in the comments what you think happens when unstoppable innovation meets immovable tradition. The morning Austin sun blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tesla's gigafactory as Elon Musk stood before a wall of production metrics, his fingers dancing across a holographic display. Numbers climbed in real time. Batteries produced, cars assembled, solar panels shipped, each digit representing his relentless push toward a sustainable future. The familiar hum of automation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional spark. And from welding robots working with mechanical precision, Mr. Musk, his assistant's voice cut through his concentration. "There's a call from Vatican City." Musk paused, his hand hovering over the display. The Vatican. He turned, eyebrows raised. In his decades of receiving calls from world leaders, tech moguls, and space agencies, the Vatican had never been on the list. "They say it's urgent. Pope Leo XIV wishes to speak with you personally." The production floor seemed to quiet around him as Musk processed this unexpected development. Pope Leo XIV, the American Pope who had taken the world by storm just months ago, with his bold vision of faith meeting the digital age. Musk had watched the papal election coverage with mild interest, noting how the former Cardinal Robert Francis Provost had surprised everyone by choosing such a historically significant papal name. "Put him through to my office," Musk said, his mind already racing through possibilities. Minutes later, seated behind his minimalist desk with Earth visible through the window behind him, Musk lifted the secure phone. The voice that greeted him carried the weight of centuries, yet spoke with distinctly American directness. "Mr. Musk, this is Pope Leo XIV. I trust I'm not interrupting anything too important." "Your Holiness," Musk replied, his tone respectful but curious. "This is certainly unexpected." "I imagine it is. Mr. Musk, I'm calling because I believe we need to have a conversation face to face. About technology's role in serving humanity, about the future we're building, and about questions that neither of us can answer alone." Musk leaned back in his chair, studying the Earth's curvature through his window. "When did you have in mind?" "Tomorrow, in Vatican City. I know it's short notice, but some conversations can't wait." The line fell silent, except for the subtle hum of the factory below. Musk's engineers continued their work, unaware that their boss was about to make a decision that would reshape everything. After ending the call, Musk sat motionless for several minutes, his gaze fixed on the Tesla logo etched into his desk. The Pope's invitation echoed in his mind, not a request, but a challenge wrapped in courtesy. His secure line buzzed again. "Gwyn's here," his assistant announced, referring to Gwyn Shotwell, SpaceX's president, and one of the few people whose counsel Musk truly valued. "Send her in." Shotwell entered with purposeful strides, already sensing something significant had shifted. "You look like someone just asked you to redesign physics," she said, settling into the chair across from him. Close. "Pope Leo XIV wants to meet tomorrow in Vatican City." Her eyebrows shot up. "The American Pope? That's unexpected." She leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "What did you tell him?" "I said yes." "Elon." Her voice carried that particular tone she used when preparing to deliver unwelcome news. "Do you know what meeting the Pope entails? There are protocols, centuries-old traditions." Musk's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Such as?" "Kneeling, kissing his ring, bowing when you enter." She watched his face carefully. "It's not negotiable. It's how these things work." The silence stretched between them. Musk's mind drifted to other moments, standing before world leaders, tech titans, and government officials who expected deference. The Chinese president who had waited for a bow that never came. The British Prime Minister who had learned to accept a handshake instead of the customary genuflection. The German Chancellor who had actually respected him more for refusing to bend. "I don't kneel," Musk said finally, his voice quiet but absolute. "This isn't a tech conference, Elon. This is the Vatican. The Pope. Even presidents follow protocol there." "I don't kneel," he repeated, louder this time. "Not for presidents, not for kings, not for anyone." Shotwell studied his face, recognizing the expression she'd seen before rocket launches. Complete certainty mixed with quiet defiance. "Why?" she asked softly. Musk stood and walked to the window, watching a Falcon Heavy rocket being transported in the distance. "My father taught me something when I was 12, he said without turning around. He said the moment you kneel before another human being, you've forgotten that you're supposed to be reaching for the stars. This could cause an international incident. Or," Musk turned back to her, his eyes bright with the same intensity, "that had driven him to revolutionize cars, rockets, and the internet. It could start something entirely different." Shotwell sighed, already reaching for her phone. "I'll prep the jet. And Elon, you'd better be right about this." Within the ancient walls of the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV knelt in his private chapel as the last rays of Roman sunlight filtered through stained glass windows. The weight of the papal ring felt heavier tonight, not from gold and tradition, but from the decision he'd made hours earlier. Behind him, soft footsteps announced Cardinal Bertolli's arrival. "Your Holiness," the Cardinal whispered, his voice carrying decades of Vatican protocol. "The Council is concerned about tomorrow's meeting." Pope Leo XIV rose slowly, his American pragmatism evident even in the fluid motion. At 62, Robert Francis Provost had carried his engineering background into the papacy, approaching faith with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to building bridges. Concerned about what specifically? Elon Musk's reputation precedes him, Holy Father. He's known for unconventional approaches to authority. The Pope moved to his desk, where a thick dossier lay open, years of Musk's interviews, business, decisions and public statements, meticulously compiled by Vatican researchers. "Cardinal, do you know what I see when I read about this man?" Bertolli shifted uncomfortably. "A brilliant but unpredictable entrepreneur? I see someone who refuses to accept limitations." Pope Leo XIV traced his finger along a photo of Musk, standing before a Falcon Heavy rocket. When the world said private space travel was impossible, he made it routine. When they said electric cars couldn't compete, he revolutionized transportation. When they said global internet was too complex, he launched satellites. But Your Holiness, his disregard for traditional protocols is exactly why I called him. The Pope's voice carried quiet authority. "Cardinal, we face a generation that finds God through technology, not tradition. They pray through social media, find community in virtual spaces, and seek transcendence through innovation. We can either speak their language or watch them drift away entirely." The Cardinal frowned. "Surely there are other tech leaders who would be more compliant?" Pope Leo XIV closed the dossier and looked toward the window, where Rome's ancient skyline met the modern city beyond. "Compliant leaders don't change the world, Cardinal. They preserve it." He paused, his engineer's mind calculating possibilities. "Musk doesn't just build rockets and cars, he builds hope. He makes people believe impossible things can happen. And if he refuses to follow Vatican protocol tomorrow?" A slight smile crossed the Pope's face. "Then we'll discover whether two men who refuse to accept impossible can find common ground." The Cardinal's expression remained troubled. "The other cardinals are already questioning this decision." "Let them question," Pope Leo XIV said, moving toward his private study. "Tomorrow, we either begin a new chapter in how the Church engages with human innovation, or we learn why some bridges can't be built. And which outcome do you expect, Holy Father? The Pope paused at his door. The one that serves God's people best. The Vatican's protocol office buzzed with unprecedented urgency as Monsignor Alessandro Fierro spread centuries-old ceremonial manuals across the mahogany conference table. Swiss guards stood at attention outside while inside. Cardinal Bertoli paced before a wall of historical portraits depicting papal audiences with emperors and kings. "Gentlemen," Fierro announced to the assembled officials, his voice tight with professional anxiety, "we have 18 hours to prepare for what could be the most unconventional papal audience in modern history." Cardinal Secretary of State Parolin leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped. "What exactly do we know about Mr. Musk's tendencies regarding protocol?" Fierro consulted his tablet, scrolling through intelligence reports. "He's met with President Xi, Chancellor Merkel and Prime Minister Johnson. In every documented case, he offered handshakes instead of traditional genuflections. No bowing, no kneeling, minimal deference to rank. And they accepted this? They adapted to him, not the reverse. 40,000 feet above the Atlantic, Musk's Gulfstream G650 cut through the night sky toward Rome. In the aircraft's conference area, his communications director Sarah Chen sat across from him, her laptop displaying talking points she knew he'd never use. "Elon, we need to discuss tomorrow's optics," she began carefully. "The Vatican has very specific expectations. I'm not performing a ceremony, Sarah. I'm having a conversation. A conversation that will be scrutinized by 2 billion Catholics worldwide." She pulled up photos on her screen. "Look, when Obama met Pope Benedict, he bowed. When Macron met Pope Francis, he knelt. Even Putin follows Vatican protocol." Musk glanced at the images, then returned his attention to the window where stars pierced the darkness. "Did any of them change the world afterward? That's not the point. It's exactly the point." He turned back to her, his expression serious. "Sarah, do you know why I started SpaceX?" She blinked at the apparent non sequitur. "To make humanity multiplanetary, to prove that impossible things happen when you refuse to accept limitations." His voice carried the same quiet intensity she'd heard before every major launch. "Tomorrow isn't about protocol. It's about whether two people who believe in impossible things can find a way forward." Back in Vatican City, Fierro closed his ceremonial manual with a snap. "Cardinal, what if he simply refuses to follow protocol? What if he won't kneel?" Cardinal Bertoli stopped pacing, his face grave. "Then we'll discover whether Pope Leo XIV truly meant what he said about speaking to a new generation. And if this becomes an international incident, then we'll learn whether the Church is strong enough to survive innovation." The room fell silent as both men contemplated the same troubling thought. By this time tomorrow, either the Vatican would adapt to the modern world, or the modern world would publicly reject the Vatican's authority. Neither possibility felt comfortable. The black Mercedes glided through the ancient gates of Vatican City as morning light painted the cobblestones gold. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession from behind security barriers where journalists from CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera jostled for position. The sight they captured would dominate headlines within hours. Elon Musk, the man who'd sent rockets to Mars, arriving to meet the Pope who'd taken an emperor's name. Musk emerged from the vehicle wearing a simple black suit, his eyes scanning the Renaissance architecture with the same analytical intensity he typically reserved for rocket engines. Swiss guards in their colorful uniforms stood at attention, their ceremonial halberds catching the sunlight as Vatican protocol officers approached with practiced deference. "Mr. Musk, welcome to Vatican City," Monsignor Fierro said, his voice carrying barely concealed tension. "I'm Alessandro Fierro, Chief of Protocol. If we might have a brief moment before your audience with His Holiness." "Of course," Musk replied, though his gaze remained fixed on St. Peter's Basilica towering ahead. Behind the press barriers, BBC correspondent James Morrison spoke rapidly into his microphone. The question everyone's asking is whether the world's most unconventional billionaire will follow the Vatican's ancient traditions. Sources suggest Musk has never knelt before any world leader. Inside the press scrum, Vatican Radio's director whispered urgently into his phone, "Alert the Holy Father's staff. The atmosphere is more charged than we anticipated." Fierro gestured toward a private antechamber. "Mr. Musk, regarding the protocols for papal audiences, when you enter His Holiness's presence, the customary approach is to bow slightly, then kneel and kiss the papal ring. It's a tradition dating back—" "I understand." "The tradition," Musk interrupted gently but firmly. His tone held no disrespect, only quiet certainty. "I also understand why I'm here." The protocol chief's carefully rehearsed words died in his throat. Behind them, security personnel exchanged glances, sensing the subtle shift in dynamics. This wasn't going according to anyone's script. "Sir," Fierro tried again, "Pope Leo XIV is expecting—" "Pope Leo XIV called me," Musk said, straightening his jacket. "Not the other way around. I think he knows exactly what he's expecting." Through the ancient windows, church bells began to toll across Rome. In papal apartments high above, Pope Leo XIV concluded his morning prayers and rose from his kneeler. Cardinal Bertolli appeared at his door, face pale with concern. "Holy Father, there are complications developing in the courtyard." The Pope moved to his window, watching the scene below where Musk stood, surrounded by nervous officials and clicking cameras. "No, Cardinal. What's developing down there is exactly what we hoped for. Authenticity." The marble corridors of the Apostolic Palace stretched ahead like a pathway through centuries, each footstep echoing off frescoed walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Musk walked steadily behind Monsignor Fierro, his hands clasped behind his back, while Swiss guards flanked them in perfect synchronization. Their ceremonial steps created a rhythm that seemed to count down to an inevitable moment. "This is it," Musk thought, his eyes taking in the papal portraits lining the walls. Centuries of men who knelt before these same figures. His gaze lingered on a painting of Pope Leo XIII, the original bearer of the name, depicted receiving homage from European nobility, all of them kneeling. "The Holy Father's apartments are just ahead," Fierro announced softly, his voice barely audible above their footsteps. Musk's mind drifted to a memory from his childhood in South Africa. He was 12, standing before his engineering professor father, who had just finished explaining why the space program would never be profitable, never be sustainable, never be more than government theatrics. But what if it could be? Young Elon had asked. "Son," his father had replied, "some dreams are worth pursuing even when everyone tells you they're impossible. But the moment you compromise your core principles to chase them, you've lost what made the dream worth having in the first place." The corridor ahead curved slightly, revealing ornate double doors guarded by 2 more Swiss guards. Behind those doors waited Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope, the man who'd surprised the world by choosing the name of an emperor's contemporary, a pontiff who'd faced down kings and built an empire of faith. "He called me," Musk reminded himself. "He knows my reputation. He knows I don't kneel." But another voice whispered in his mind, 2 billion Catholics, centuries of tradition, one moment that could change everything or destroy it. His security detail's quiet chatter faded into background noise as Musk considered the weight of his decision. Every rocket launch carried this same moment, the point where calculations ended and faith began, where you either trusted your engineering or you didn't, where you either believed in your mission or you compromised it for someone else's comfort. Swiss guards at the papal doors moved into position, their white gloves precise against the ancient bronze handles. Fierro turned to Musk one final time, his expression a mixture of hope and resignation. "Mr. Musk, I must ask once more." "I know what I'm here to do," Musk said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm certainty that had preceded every SpaceX launch, every Tesla unveiling, every moment when he'd chosen the impossible over the safe. The doors began to open. Behind them, the future waited. The doors swung open to reveal Pope Leo XIV standing beside a simple wooden desk, sunlight streaming through tall windows behind him. Unlike the ornate throne rooms Musk had imagined, the papal study felt surprisingly intimate, bookshelves lined with engineering texts alongside theological works, a small crucifix on the wall, and two comfortable chairs arranged for conversation. "Rather than ceremony, Mr. Musk," Pope Leo XIV said, his voice carrying the same directness that had surprised the world during his election. "Welcome." The room held its breath. Monsignor Fierro stepped forward slightly, his eyes darting between the two men. Cardinal Bertoli, positioned discreetly near the window, clasped his hands tightly. A single photographer, authorized to capture this historic moment, raised his camera. Musk stepped forward into the papal presence. The weight of tradition pressed down like gravity, centuries of protocol, billions of faithful watching, the expectation that even the most powerful men humbled themselves before the Vicar of Christ. The Pope remained standing, his eyes steady and curious rather than expectant. He wore simple white vestments, the papal ring catching a glint of Roman sunlight. Between them, the space felt charged with possibility and peril. This was the moment. The pause before the rocket fired, the silence before the engine started, the breath before the leap. Musk didn't bow. He didn't kneel. Instead, he extended his right hand directly toward Pope Leo XIV. Gasps rippled through the small gathering. The photographer's camera clicked rapidly. Monsignor Fierro's face went pale, while Cardinal Bertoli closed his eyes briefly as if preparing for catastrophe. "Your Holiness," Musk said simply, his hand steady in the space between them, "thank you for the invitation." The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but lasted only seconds. Pope Leo XIV studied Musk's face, reading something there that no one else could see. The extended hand hung in the air, not aggressive, not disrespectful, but absolutely certain. Then, to everyone's shock, Pope Leo XIV smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his entire presence. "Mr. Musk," the Pope said, reaching out to grasp the offered hand firmly, "I was hoping you'd do exactly that." Their handshake lasted longer than protocol demanded, two men taking each other's measure across a divide that had just narrowed considerably. When they finally released, Pope Leo XIV gestured toward the chairs. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." The room remained frozen in stunned silence as both men moved toward their seats, leaving everyone else to process what had just happened. History had just shifted, and no one was quite sure in which direction. As Pope Leo XIV and Musk settled into their chairs, the papal study remained suspended in electric silence. Monsignor Fierro stood frozen, his protocol manual useless against what had just unfolded. Cardinal Bertoli's weathered hands trembled slightly as he processed the unprecedented scene, a billionaire refusing to kneel, and the Pope not only accepting it, but welcoming it. The photographer lowered his camera, uncertain whether he'd just captured a diplomatic triumph or disaster. Outside, Swiss guards maintained their positions, unaware that centuries of Vatican protocol had just been quietly revolutionized in the space of a handshake. "Monsignor Fierro," Pope Leo XIV said gently, not taking his eyes off Musk. "Perhaps you could arrange for some coffee, American style if possible." The protocol chief blinked rapidly. Your Holiness, should we perhaps discuss?" "Coffee will be fine, Alessandro. Thank you." The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Fierro retreated with visible relief, grateful to escape the room's charged atmosphere. Cardinal Bertoli remained by the window, his expression cycling between confusion and fascination. "You're not what I expected," Pope Leo XIV said to Musk, settling back in his chair with surprising casualness. "Neither are you," Musk replied, studying the Pope's face. "When Cardinal Provost became Pope Leo XIV, I researched the name. Leo the Great, Leo X, who excommunicated Luther, Leo XIII, who wrote about workers' rights. Bold choices, all of them." The Pope's eyes brightened with interest. "You did your homework." "I always do my homework." Musk paused, then asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why weren't you offended? Every briefing I received said Vatican protocol was non-negotiable." Pope Leo XIV glanced at Cardinal Bertoli, who was listening intently despite trying to appear otherwise. "Cardinal, what did I tell you yesterday about Mr. Musk?" Bertoli cleared his throat nervously. "That compliant leaders don't change the world, Holy Father." "Exactly." The Pope turned back to Musk. "Mr. Musk, do you know why I chose the name Leo XIV? Historical significance, papal authority, traditional strength. All true. But there's another reason." Pope Leo XIV leaned forward slightly. "Leo means lion, and sometimes the Church needs to remember that we're called to be lions, not lambs. Lions don't kneel to other lions, they respect them." The room's tension began to transform into something entirely different. Cardinal Bertoli found himself leaning closer, drawn despite his reservations. Even the photographer sensed that this conversation had moved beyond mere protocol into uncharted territory. "So this was a test?" Musk asked. "This was a recognition," the Pope corrected. "The question isn't whether you would follow our traditions, Mr. Musk. The question is whether we're brave enough to build new ones." Musk's expression shifted, revealing genuine surprise. For the first time since entering the Vatican, together. Coffee arrived on a simple silver tray, the rich aroma filling the papal study as Cardinal Bertoli quietly withdrew to give the two men privacy. Only the photographer remained, his camera now lowered, sensing that what was unfolding deserved witness rather than documentation. "Tell me about Mars," Pope Leo XIV said, settling back with his cup. "Not the engineering, the why." Musk paused, coffee halfway to his lips. Most world leaders asked about timelines, costs, or geopolitical implications. No one had ever asked about purpose. "You want the real answer or the one that makes investors comfortable? I called you here for truth, not comfort." "Mars isn't about escaping Earth," Musk began, his voice taking on the intensity reserved for his deepest convictions. "It's about preserving consciousness itself. Every species that's ever lived has eventually faced extinction. We're the first that might choose not to." The Pope leaned forward, his engineer's mind engaging. "Consciousness, an interesting word choice. Some might say soul. Would that bother you, a tech billionaire talking about souls?" "Mr. Musk, I spent 30 years building bridges before I built sermons. I've always believed that creation, whether divine or human, reveals itself through engineering as much as through prayer." Pope Leo XIV gestured toward his bookshelf, where technical manuals sat beside theological texts. "What bothers me isn't technology serving humanity, it's technology replacing it." Musk set down his coffee, recognizing a kindred spirit. "That's exactly the problem. Everyone sees artificial intelligence as either humanity's salvation or its doom. But what if it's neither? What if it's just a tool, like fire or language? Tools shaped by the hands that wield them," the Pope agreed. "Which brings us to the real question: who's shaping the future of human consciousness? Right now, a handful of tech companies in Silicon Valley who've never asked whether they should, only whether they could." The room fell silent as both men contemplated the implications. Outside, Rome continued its ancient rhythm, unaware that two of the world's most influential figures were discussing the future of human existence over coffee. in a room lined with centuries of wisdom. "Your Holiness," Musk said finally, "what if technology could amplify human dignity instead of diminishing it? What if we could use innovation to connect people to something greater rather than isolating them?" Pope Leo XIV smiled, an expression of genuine delight crossing his face. "Mr. Musk, I think you've just described the mission of the Church in the digital age. And I think you've just described the mission of technology in service of something eternal." They stared at each other across the small table, both realizing they'd discovered something neither had expected. A shared vision that transcended their different approaches to serving humanity. "We should talk more," the Pope said quietly. "Much more," Musk agreed. Pope Leo XV stood and walked to his window, gazing out at St. Peter's Square, where thousands of pilgrims gathered daily seeking hope. When he turned back to Musk, his expression had shifted to something more challenging. "Mr. Musk, I have to ask the question that troubles many people of faith," the Pope said, his voice carrying the weight of pastoral responsibility. "While you're spending billions to reach Mars, children are starving on Earth. While you're planning cities among the stars, people are living in poverty beneath them. How do you reconcile that?" Musk had heard this question countless times from journalists, politicians, and activists. But coming from Pope Leo XIV, it carried different weight, the concern of a shepherd for his flock, rather than the gotcha of a critic seeking headlines. "Your Holiness, may I tell you about the Borlaug hypothesis?" The Pope raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite his challenge. "Please." Norman Borlaug saved 1 billion lives through agricultural innovation, the Green Revolution. But he could only do that because centuries earlier, other scientists had pursued seemingly impractical research into plant genetics, chemistry, and engineering. Musk leaned forward, his passion evident. "Space technology isn't separate from Earth's problems. It's solving them." "How so?" "The satellite internet we're deploying for Mars communication is connecting remote schools in Africa. The life support systems we're developing for space colonies are revolutionizing water purification in drought-stricken regions. The solar technology we need for Mars is making clean energy accessible to villages that never had electricity." Pope Leo XIV returned to his chair, his engineering background fully engaged now. "You're saying Mars research is actually Earth research?" "I'm saying human consciousness, call it the soul if you prefer, expresses itself through innovation. When we push the boundaries of what's possible, we don't just discover new worlds, we discover new ways to heal this one." The photographer, forgotten in the corner, found himself captivated by the exchange. Cardinal Bertoli, who had been listening from the adjoining room, stepped quietly back into the study, drawn by the conversation's intensity. "But the cost," the Pope pressed. "The resources. Surely direct investment in earthly suffering would be more efficient." Musk's expression grew serious. "Your Holiness, what if I told you that everything we're learning about sustaining life on Mars, growing food in hostile environments, recycling every molecule of water, generating power from minimal resources, what if those technologies could end famine, drought, and energy poverty on Earth? I'd ask why you haven't led with that argument." "Because," Musk said quietly, "most people can't see past the rockets to understand the real mission, ensuring that human consciousness, whatever you believe that to be, has a future." Pope Leo XIV was silent for a long moment, processing implications that went far beyond space exploration. "You're not just building escape pods," he said finally, "you're building arks. Walk with me," Pope Leo XIV said, rising from his chair with sudden energy. "There's something I want to show you." They moved through corridors that had witnessed centuries of papal decisions, but today felt different, charged with possibility, rather than weighed down by tradition. Cardinal Bertoli followed at a respectful distance, his expression cycling between fascination and concern as they emerged into the Vatican gardens. Ancient cypress trees stretched toward the Roman sky, while perfectly manicured paths wound between fountains that had flowed since the Renaissance. Pope Leo XIV led Musk to a secluded alcove where modern solar panels, almost invisible among the classical architecture, powered a water purification system serving a nearby monastery. "I had these installed last year," the Pope explained, gesturing to the panels. "The cardinals called it unnecessary innovation. I called it stewardship." Musk examined the installation with professional interest. "Efficient design. Who's your contractor?" "A small Italian firm. They're struggling to scale." Pope Leo XIV paused meaningfully. "Perhaps they need better partners." Behind them, Cardinal Bertoli cleared his throat nervously. "Holy Father, if I might suggest we return to more traditional discussions." "Cardinal," the Pope interrupted gently, "tradition serves us best when it guides innovation, not when it prevents it." Musk turned from the solar array, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "Your Holiness, what if this wasn't just about solar panels? What if we could create a model for technology serving spiritual mission?" "Explain." Starlink satellites providing internet to remote missionary schools, Tesla Powerwall systems keeping medical clinics running in developing nations, Neuralink technology helping paralyzed priests celebrate Mass. Musk's voice gained momentum. Technology guided by moral purpose instead of just profit. Pope Leo XIV's eyes brightened with the same intensity he'd shown as a young engineer. "A global network of innovation serving human dignity." Exactly, but it would need moral leadership, ethical guidance, someone who understands that technology without wisdom becomes tyranny. The implications hung in the garden air between them. Cardinal Bertoli stepped forward, unable to contain his concerns any longer. "Holy Father, the Church has never formally partnered with commercial enterprises on this scale. The theological implications alone are exactly why we need to think carefully about this," Pope Leo XIV agreed. "But Cardinal, what's the greater risk, engaging with technology's development or allowing it to develop without moral input?" Musk nodded appreciatively. "Every major technological advancement in history has been shaped by the values of its creators. Right now, those values are coming from Silicon Valley boardrooms. What if they came from somewhere with a longer perspective on human flourishing?" The three men stood among the ancient gardens where popes had made decisions that shaped civilizations. Around them, Rome hummed with modern life, built on foundations laid by countless generations who had chosen progress over comfort. "This would require careful planning," the Pope said slowly. "Theological review, careful consideration of implications, and complete transparency," Musk added. "Every project public, every decision explained, no black boxes, no hidden agendas." Pope Leo XIV extended his hand once again. "Mr. Musk, I believe we have the foundation for something unprecedented." As Pope Leo XIV and Musk shook hands in the Vatican gardens, neither man could have anticipated how that single gesture would ripple across the globe. The photographer, who had remained silent throughout their conversation, captured the moment. Two figures silhouetted against ancient cypress trees, their handshake representing not just an agreement, but a bridge between worlds that had seemed irreconcilable. Within hours, the image dominated every news cycle on Earth. In Silicon Valley boardrooms, tech executives watched the coverage with expressions ranging from bewilderment to concern. "The Pope is partnering with Musk," whispered one venture capitalist to another as CNN replayed footage of their garden conversation. "This changes everything." At the United Nations headquarters in New York, diplomats huddled in urgent discussions about the implications of the Vatican, a sovereign state, entering into technological partnerships that could reshape global development. Some called it brilliant. Others called it dangerous. In remote villages across Africa and South America, priests and missionaries gathered around satellite phones and laptops, watching the news with growing excitement. Father Miguel in rural Guatemala turned to his fellow clergy and said quietly, "Perhaps now we can bring both light and light to places that have known neither." But not everyone celebrated. In traditional Catholic circles, heated debates erupted about the propriety of the Church allying with commercial interests. Cardinal Archbishop Williams of Boston appeared on news programs expressing grave concerns about mixing sacred mission with secular enterprise. Other church leaders, however, remembered Pope Leo XIV's words about courage and began to see possibilities they'd never considered. 6 months later, the first fruits of their partnership became visible. In the drought-stricken regions of Somalia, Tesla solar arrays powered water purification systems that served refugee camps, while Starlink satellites connected mobile medical clinics to specialists thousands of miles away. The technology bore a simple inscription, Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, for the greater glory of God. At SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, engineers worked alongside Jesuit scientists to develop life support systems that could sustain missions to Mars, while simultaneously revolutionizing sustainable living on Earth. The collaboration sparked innovations neither group could have achieved alone, technology guided by both scientific rigor and moral purpose. Pope Leo XIV's monthly addresses began incorporating discussions of technological ethics, while Musk's public presentations increasingly referenced questions of human dignity and spiritual purpose. Critics accused both men of blurring lines that should remain distinct. Supporters argued they were finally connecting solutions to problems that had been artificially separated. The most dramatic change came in the developing world. Villages that had never seen electricity suddenly had power, internet and clean water, all bearing the symbolic partnership of cross and rocket. Children in Madagascar learned coding alongside catechism. Medical students in rural Peru attended lectures from Harvard while serving their local communities. 1 year after that historic handshake, Pope Leo XIV stood before the United Nations General Assembly. The question, he told the gathered world leaders, has never been whether technology and faith can coexist. The question is whether we have the wisdom to ensure they serve the same master, human flourishing. In the audience, Musk watched as delegates from 193 nations gave the Pope a standing ovation. Later, in a brief interview, Musk reflected on their partnership. We discovered that reaching for Mars and reaching for God might not be different journeys at all. Both require us to transcend our limitations and serve something greater than ourselves. But perhaps the most telling moment came during a quiet evening in the Vatican gardens, as Pope Leo XIV and Musk walked the same paths where they'd first shaken hands. No cameras followed them now, no headlines waited to be written. "Do you think we've changed anything?" Musk asked, watching satellites streak across the Roman sky, some carrying internet to remote schools, others heading toward the International Space Station. Pope Leo XIV smiled, his engineer's eyes tracking the same. "Points of light. Mr. Musk, I think we've remembered something the world had forgotten, that the highest technology and the deepest faith both aim toward the same destination, serving the dignity of every human soul. Above them, ancient stars bore witness to a new chapter in humanity's story, one where innovation and wisdom had finally learned to walk hand in hand. And in that handshake, the future had found its foundation.